Welcome back. Heather Powers is an accomplished woman, wife, and mother. She is also a successful vocalist, songwriter, and musician. She has toured and performed with artists such as Huey Lewis and the News, Brian Duncan, Rachel Lampa, and more. She was also part of the voiceover cast for the movie version of the Broadway hit Rent, and her testimony has been featured on the 700 Club. Serving as worship leader for her church leaves just enough time to write for an online magazine. Welcome with me today, Heather Powers. You are one busy woman.
Some days it feels very much like that, yeah.
And you've had a very full life.
I have. You know, I've had the privilege of doing what I love to do and what God's gifted me to do. And I somehow, some days don't know how to juggle all of it, but, you know, God's grace and mercy is new every morning, and I'm counting on that.
Well, fill in the and more. Who else have you performed with?
I have performed with Martha Manuzzi, who's very hot right now, Kurt Carr, who's a wonderful singer-songwriter, gospel artist. I am working on some projects with some really great people that I'm not going to mention quite yet because, but I feel very privileged. I'm getting to write with some people that I have only dreamt of being able to write with. So
wow,
really exciting.
And you're going to actually sing for us a little later in the program today, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, you've had an interesting journey. Are you going to tell us a little about it?
Yeah, I would love to. You know, I was raised a pastor's kid, and for many, well, first of all, I think the stigma of pastor's kids sometimes precedes them, and I didn't live short of that. I grew up in a wonderful home where I had the truth my whole life, and I have had a very rich heritage. And I learned at a very early age to live to please a lot of people. I'm a firstborn as well, and so that, you know, that need to just keep everything okay on the outside, and that was just a natural character trait I think I had to begin with. But when I was 13 and a half, we had a real traumatic incident that happened in our home. I had been stalked, and a man broke in, it was, you know, ready to do the unspeakable, and my sister was actually the one that fended him off, and was pretty devastating at 13 and a half when you're just developing a lot of who you are as a woman and the things that, you know, go along with that. And then about a year and a half later, I was raped by a boy that I knew. My parents had gone away for well, they went on vacation, and I was with somebody I knew I shouldn't be. And I felt like that was just punishment, even though I knew it was wrong. And I know a lot of times victims feel a lot of guilt and shame, and so they hold it inside. And, you know, I never, at that point in my life, got help for, you know, those wounds. I learned to suppress them very quickly, because I remember going back to the first day of school after the first incident happened, and I knew I had changed. And I wasn't sure how, and in those days in the church, we weren't quite as open maybe as we are now about some of those things, but you know, I began to stuff and stuff and stuff, and at some point those things come out in one way or another, and there were a few years of my life that the wretchedness that I had been suppressing for many years just came out in full force.
So, and resulted in?
Resulted in I walked out of my marriage. I had a history of chronic migraine headaches that a doctor had just prescribed me a plethora of drugs, and so when I just kind of went crazy, and at that point I had no reason not to go and see how deep I could you know, go as far as drugs were concerned, and I just lived this whole illicit drug life and became promiscuous. I mean, it was like I literally lost my mind for a season of time. And
but if anybody saw you that knew you, wouldn't know this was going on?
Well, at first they certainly wouldn't have. But you know, when I started just pumping myself full of things, I really wasn't. I was a shell of me. But you know, it was funny how I ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and it was the first time that I ever really had the opportunity to really talk about some of these things that had been stuffed for so long. You know,
how old were you?
I was about 27 at the time, but you know, I married very young, and I had 2 kids who are wonderful kids. God has done such a shielding of their lives, and they're both testaments of His grace. But I I got married young and did a lot of external living for other people while I was dying inside. And so a lot of the foundation that probably should have been there for a marriage and a home and a mom and all these things, it was gravely missing because I was just struggling to just stay, above water at that point.
And I imagine people watching us today may be in that same place.
I'll tell you, I have the privilege of speaking to a lot of women who really are in a very similar spot, in that they are experiencing just deep, deep trouble in their spirit, but feel so responsible to keep everything in the air and keep juggling. And sometimes we feel so ashamed that nobody will forgive us, or that no one will understand, and that our sin and pain is so different. And then the enemy isolates us, and that's exactly, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and that's one way that he does it, I see especially with women.
And you're afraid to speak out because of what people may think of you
Absolutely.
as well. And you've lived this life and you feel like you've moved forward. You don't want to come to a screeching halt.
Not the kind of thing you announce at church on Sunday.
Right.
Or at Bible study a lot of times. There's not that safe place where you can just, this is where I'm at and I need help out because I can't get there.
I see a woman now full of joy and love and compassion and a servant's heart. And you had to get there some way. Will you share that with us after the break?
Yeah, absolutely.
We will. More with Heather Powers when we return.
He has taken the things that I have experienced, and he's now used them as trophies of his mercy and grace that can reach and touch other people. And I feel like those have been redeemed because they're not where they used to be. They're in his hands now. Now they speak a book of love to someone else who's going through the same thing.